Imagine standing right in the bustling heart of Abidjan.
Oh, yeah. Beautiful city.
Right. Like you're surrounded by these gleaming new skyscrapers reflecting the West African sun. And the streets are just packed.
Absolutely packed.
The ports are incredibly busy, too. I mean, they're moving tons of cocoa and cashew nuts out to the global market.
Right. The export sector is booming there.
Yeah, and everywhere you look, there's just construction, like cranes in the sky, foreign investment flowing in. The national bank ledgers are practically overflowing at this point.
It looks like an absolute powerhouse.
Exactly. If you took a snapshot of this city right now, you would look at it and say, this is it. This is a nation that has entirely figured out the blueprint for economic success.
Well, it is a very convincing picture. I mean, if you only look at the macroeconomic data, like those national averages, that picture holds up perfectly.
But, and this is the big but, here's the paradox we are exploring today. Imagine leaving that gleaming downtown area.
Right. Getting out of the city.
Yeah, you get in a car and drive just a couple of hours north, out of the capital region, deep into the rural agricultural zones.
Where things look very, very different.
Completely different. The paved roads suddenly just vanish. And you arrive in a village where the local school doesn't just lack, like, computers.
Right. It lacks a roof.
It lacks a roof. It lacks chalk. And if you look around, the average adult working in those fields has less than 5 years of formal education.
Which just completely shatters the illusion of that downtown snapshot we just talked about.
It really does. And that is exactly our mission today. We are taking a massive, comprehensive, deep dive into an extensive human development research report focusing on Côte d'Ivoire.
And this report covers a huge time span, right?
It does. It tracks the years from 1990 all the way to 2023. And our goal here is to really look at the space between those shiny skyscrapers and those rural villages.
Because that space is where the real story is.
Exactly. Because when you look at the actual data, you find a pretty terrifying reality. Nearly 40% of all the country's developmental gains over the last 3 decades have essentially been wiped out for the average citizen.
Yeah, wiped out is the exact right phrase there. But we really need to understand the mechanics of how it gets wiped out.
Right. It's not like someone set the money on fire.
Exactly. This isn't money evaporating into thin air or, hospitals just sinking into the ground. We're looking at a deeply entrenched structural hoarding of resources.
Structural hoarding. Okay, I like that term.
Right, because Côte d'Ivoire is currently in an incredibly delicate, critical window of transition right now. They are attempting to move from being a low human development country into a medium human development country.
Which is like the hardest hurdle to clear, right?
Yeah.
Getting that first bit of growth is one thing, but actually distributing it is another entirely.
Precisely. It serves as a perfect, albeit pretty sobering, case study for a phenomenon we see all over the globe.
The illusion of average growth.
Yes. That transition period where an economy just booms on a macro level, but severe inequality completely hardens on the micro level.
I always think of it like a massive corporation announcing, absolute record profits on Wall Street.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. Like the stock is soaring, the CEO is doing all these press tours, the shareholders are out buying yachts.
Everyone's celebrating.
But if you walk down to the actual factory floor, the employees are looking at their paychecks and they've shrunk.
Because inflation ate their raises.
Exactly. Inflation ate their raises, their health benefits got slashed, and management is just living in a totally different universe. The quote-unquote average wealth of the company went up, but the lived reality of the workers went way down.
It's the ultimate disconnect. I mean, the numbers on the spreadsheet say one thing, but the lived human experience says another.
Yeah.
And to truly understand how that dynamic plays out at a national scale in Côte d'Ivoire, we can't just look at today.
Right. We have to rewind the tape.
Exactly. We have to track the 33-year ascent of their Human Development Index, or the HDI.
Okay, let's do that. Because HDI is basically the gold standard for measuring this stuff.
It really is. It's so much better than just GDP.
Yeah, it's not just how much money does the country make. And looking at the raw numbers, the historical context here is wild.
Very wild.
If we rewind back to 1990, Côte d'Ivoire's HDI was sitting at a staggering low of 0.39.
And just to give some context to listeners on a 0.39, that is a baseline of severe systemic deprivation.
Wow.
Yeah, that is a country struggling with fundamental survival on a daily basis.
And from 1990, it just crawls.
Yeah.
Like it's a grinding, agonizingly slow process through the 90s and the
Which
2000s.
makes sense if you know the history, right? I mean, they went through severe political instability and civil conflicts during that time.
Right, it's often called their lost decade.
Exactly. But then if you look at the graph, the data shows a very distinct turning point.
Around 2013, right?
Yep, around 2013, the HDI hits 0.47, and suddenly the graph points sharply upward.
It just takes off.
It enters this period of accelerated, really aggressive growth. That's the post-conflict reconstruction phase.
Okay, so what actually changed on the ground to trigger that?
Well, the country stabilized politically around 2011 and 2012, and that just opened the floodgates for foreign investment.
Ah, okay. Money starts pouring in.
Exactly. Infrastructure projects, a massive revitalization of their agricultural export sector.
Right. And that acceleration carries them up to an HDI of 0.52 by the year 2023.
Which is a huge jump.
Yeah, and in some specific data brackets of the report, you even see it touch 0.582, placing them at a global rank of 165.
Which is a remarkable recovery. It truly is. But here is where we need to stop looking at the HDI as just one single number.
We have to take it apart.
Yes, we need to take it apart. The HDI is actually an aggregate. Think of it as a three-legged stool that supports human development.
Okay, a three-legged stool. I can picture that.
The three legs are health, education, and income.
Got it.
And if one leg grows really long but the other two stay short, well, the stool tips over.
Right, the country becomes structurally unstable. So let's measure the legs of that stool in 2023 to see how stable things actually are.
Let's do it.
Okay, first leg, health. The metric here is life expectancy at birth. In 2023, it reached 61.9 years.
And back in 1990.
Back in 1990, it was hovering around 52.7 years.
Wow, so that is nearly a full decade of life added to the average citizen.
I know. I have to pause here because, my cynical brain automatically wants to look for the catch.
Right, you're waiting for the bad news.
Exactly. But adding 10 years to life expectancy, we should be throwing a parade for that, shouldn't we? That is a massive, undeniable victory.
Oh, we absolutely should celebrate that. It is a monumental victory in public health.
So what actually drove that increase?
That jump represents mass vaccination campaigns actually reaching rural areas, for one.
Okay, that's huge.
Right. Plus better management of infectious diseases like malaria and HIV, and just a baseline stabilization of food security.
So people aren't dying of severe malnutrition in childhood as much.
Exactly. So the problem we are going to explore today isn't that this victory doesn't exist.
The problem is who gets to attend the parade.
Nailed it. Not everyone gets those 10 years.
Right. Okay, let's look at the second leg of the stool, education. And man, this is where the data gets incredibly thorny.
Oh, it's a mess.
There are two totally different numbers here. First, we have the expected years of schooling, which hit 11.4 years in 2023.
Right, so let's translate what that means for the listener. If a 5-year-old child enters the Ivorian school system today, the statistical expectation, based on current infrastructure, is that they will receive just over 11 years of education.
Which is essentially finishing high school.
Exactly.
Which sounds great.
Yeah.
But then there is the second number.
The actual mean years of schooling.
Yes. This measures the reality of the adult population currently living, working, and driving the economy right now. And that number is a dismal 4.7 years.
4.7 years. Think about the implications of that.
It's crazy.
The average adult walking the streets of Abidjan or, farming in the central regions has not even completed a primary school education. They barely have half a decade of formal learning.
That is such a jarring disconnect. How do you have a country where the expectation is 11 years, but the reality is less than 5?
Yeah.
Where do those ghost years go?
It's a combination of historical lag and just a massive dropout crisis.
Like because of the lost decade we talked about?
Partially, yeah. The adults today grew up during that conflict. Schools were closed, teachers fled, the whole system collapsed.
All right, so that makes sense.
But even today, many children start school to boost that expected number, but then they drop out by age 10.
Wait, age 10, why so early?
To work in agriculture,
Mm-hmm.
particularly in the cocoa sector. Their families need the immediate labor just to survive, so school becomes a luxury they can't afford.
Wow. Which brings us directly to the third leg of the stool. Income. And this is the one pulling the most weight.
It really is doing all the heavy lifting.
Gross national income, or GNI per capita, reached $6,735 in 2023. Now, the report measures this in 2021 purchasing power parity dollars.
Right. PPP.
For anyone who isn't an economist listening right now, what does purchasing power parity actually mean?
It is a crucial adjustment. Look, if we just use raw exchange rates to convert the local currency, the CFA franc, into US dollars, it wouldn't tell us how people actually live.
Because things cost different amounts in different places.
Exactly. A dollar buys a very different amount of food in New York than it does in rural Côte d'Ivoire.
Right.
Purchasing power parity, or PPP, adjusts the number based on the actual cost of local goods. It asks how many bags of rice or liters of fuel or doctor visits can this money actually buy locally.
Okay, so in terms of real localized buying power, the average citizen is generating the equivalent of $6,735 a year.
Yes.
And if we look back at 1990, that number was just $3,672.
So let's step back and look at the stool again. The income leg is practically doubled. It has run an absolute marathon over the last 3 decades, fueled by massive exports of cocoa, coffee, and recent discoveries of offshore oil and gas.
But the education leg.
It has basically crawled, going from an average of 1.97 years of schooling in 1990 to just 4.7 years in 2023.
That is a glacial pace compared to the economic boom.
And this is the fundamental bottleneck of their entire economy. You just cannot sustain high-tech, diversified, 21st century economic growth with a workforce that averages 4 years of education.
Because what jobs can that workforce actually do?
Exactly. They are restricted to raw physical extraction, farming, mining, basic manual labor.
They can't just pivot into being software engineers.
No, they cannot easily transition into tech, advanced manufacturing, or complex services. This creates an economy that is highly vulnerable to global commodity price shocks.
Oh, because if the global price of cocoa crashes.
The whole country feels it immediately. They don't have a highly educated workforce to pivot into other industries to cushion the blow.
Okay, here's where the story gets really dark. We've established the HDI as 0.52. The stool is wobbly, but it's standing.
For now.
Right. Now, we have to apply what I call the hidden tax on this growth.
The inequality penalty.
Yes. The report introduces a metric called the inequality adjusted HDI, or the IHDI. And when you calculate for the IHDI, the score absolutely tanks.
It's brutal.
It plummets from a 0.52 down to a 0.350.
It is a catastrophic drop.
To put a specific number on it, that is a 39.6% overall loss of human development. Almost 40% of the country's progress mathematically erased.
It's gone.
I need you to explain the mechanics of this. How does a country just lose 40% of its development?
Let's go back to your corporate analogy from earlier. Imagine a company with 10 employees.
Okay.
9 of them make $10,000 a year. One of them, the CEO, makes $910,000 a year. If you calculate the average income of that company, it's $100,000 per person.
Right, so on paper, it looks like everyone is wealthy.
But if you adjust that average to reflect the severe inequality, the reality that 9 people are practically in poverty, the true developmental score of that company collapses.
That makes total sense. So that's the inequality penalty.
Exactly. Côte d'Ivoire is generating massive amounts of wealth. They're building hospitals, expanding schools, but those resources are being fiercely hoarded at the very top of the socioeconomic pyramid.
So the 39.6% loss doesn't mean the money vanished into thin air.
No, it means the average citizen never sees a dime of it.
That penalty rate, though, nearly 40%. How does that compare globally? Like, are all developing nations seeing that kind of loss?
I mean, all countries see some loss. Even highly developed nations have inequality. But a nearly 40% penalty places Côte d'Ivoire dangerously high among its global peers.
Wow.
It suggests a deeply fractured, highly stratified society where social mobility is essentially frozen.
So to figure out where the rot is, we have to go digging into that 39.6% loss. We have to map exactly where this inequality lives.
Let's do it.
Let's guide everyone listening through the specific dimensions of this loss using the 2023 data. The report breaks it down into 3 main areas.
Right, matching the 3 legs of the stool.
Exactly. First, we have inequality in life expectancy. That accounts for a 28.5% loss.
Okay.
Second, inequality in income. That is a massive 43.45% loss.
Huge.
And third, inequality in education. A truly staggering 46.11% loss.
I want to zero in on that 46.11% education loss. It is the most severe area of inequality in their entire developmental profile.
The highest number on the board.
It is, and it is the engine that drives all the other inequalities.
Wait, really? What does a 46% inequality in education actually look like in practice? Because it's not just a mathematical abstraction, right?
No, it represents a physical, geographic hoarding of resources.
Meaning what?
It means that premium, high-quality educational infrastructure, the well-trained teachers, the modern textbooks, the reliable electricity, the internet access, is heavily concentrated in very specific urban centers.
Mostly in Abidjan.
Primarily in Abidjan, yes, and usually only accessible to wealthy demographics.
So it's not that the country doesn't have good schools.
Not at all.
It's that they are entirely walled off from the general public.
Exactly. You have elite internationally accredited schools in the wealthy Côte neighborhood of Abidjan producing students who are fully ready for universities in Paris or London.
Oh, wow.
And then you have the vast majority of the population in the rural north or west, where a single classroom might have 80 students.
80 students in one room.
Yes, with one severely underpaid teacher and no basic sanitation facilities. But the national average lumps those two realities together.
It's a completely dual society. And you mentioned that this 46% education loss drives the other metrics.
Yeah.
How does that cascade into, say, the 43.45% income loss?
It's a direct pipeline. Think about it. If a rural citizen cannot access quality education, if they drop out after 4 years because the school is broken or too far away, they cannot compete for the high-paying jobs in banking or telecommunications or international trade that are driving that $6,700 GNI.
Right. They are permanently locked out of the formal economy.
Yes, so they are forced into the informal economy.
Meaning subsistence farming?
Subsistence farming or selling goods on the side of the road or just day labor. Their income is totally depressed, while the highly educated elite absorb all the new wealth. The hoarding of education guarantees the hoarding of wealth for generations.
The vicious cycle.
Completely vicious.
So if education and income are this artificially skewed, we have to ask the most important question of this deep dive.
Who's at the bottom?
Exactly. Who exactly is being pushed to the bottom of this pyramid? Who is carrying the heaviest, most brutal burden of this 39.6% overall penalty?
Well, when you look at the demographic data, it points a glaring, unavoidable spotlight at one specific group.
Women.
Women.
The gender divide in these numbers isn't a gap, it's a chasm.
It really is.
Let's introduce the Gender Development Index, the GDI. In 2023, the GDI value for Côte d'Ivoire is 0.910. Now, to a layperson, a score of 0.9 out of 1 sounds like an A-.
Right, it sounds pretty good at first glance.
But the report places them in Group 4. What does Group 4 actually mean?
So the GDI groups countries based on how close women are to achieving parity with men.
Okay.
Group 1 is high equality. Group 5 is absolute bottom-tier inequality. So being in Group 4 means there is a very low level of equality.
So the 0.910 is mathematically masking a severe disparity in the actual lived experience.
Exactly.
Which becomes incredibly obvious when we separate the Human Development Index by gender. Remember, the national average HDI was 0.52.
Right.
But if you isolate just the women, their HDI drops to 0.553.
And the men?
The male HDI sits significantly higher at 0.607.
This is the invisible fault line of the entire country. And we can look even closer to understand the mechanics of this divide using another metric.
The Gender Inequality Index.
Yes, the GII. Because the GII doesn't just look at income, it measures reproductive health, social empowerment, and labor market participation.
And the GII score for Côte d'Ivoire in 2023 is 0.589.
Which ranks them? Where globally?
Dismal 169th out of 182 countries globally.
169th. I mean, think about that. Out of 182 measured nations, they are at the very, very bottom.
It's shocking.
What is fascinating, and honestly quite tragic, is that if you look at the historical trend, the score has slowly ticked down.
Down is good for this index, right?
Right. In 2010, it was 0.643. Today, it's 0.589. A lower score means less inequality. So technically, mathematically, things have improved slightly over 13 years.
But the global ranking proves that relative to the rest of the world, they are completely stalled.
Exactly. Other countries are advancing much faster, leaving Côte d'Ivoire as an absolute disaster zone for female social development.
And we can trace exactly how that disaster unfolds, right? It's a systematic filtering process.
It is, and it starts exactly where we were just talking, education.
Let's look at the educational pipeline leak. The data here is stark. For citizens aged 25 and older, which is the prime working age population driving the economy, only 20.01% of women have at least some secondary education.
That's 1 in 5.
Exactly. 1 in 5. Compare that to the men. 32.68% of men have some secondary education. That is a massive discrepancy.
Huge.
Why is that happening? Why are girls dropping out before middle school at such a higher rate?
It comes down to an economic calculation made by families living in poverty.
Walk me through that.
If a rural family has limited resources, Maybe they can only afford one school uniform, or the fees for one set of textbooks, or the transport cost to the nearest middle school, which is 10 miles away.
They have to choose who goes.
Right. And they will almost always invest those scarce resources in the son.
Because the societal expectation is that the son will become the primary breadwinner.
Partially that, yes, but it is also heavily tied to early marriage.
Ah.
Culturally, in many rural areas, girls are expected to marry young and integrate into their husband's family.
Right, so the parents see it differently.
From the perspective of the girl's parents, investing scarce cash into her education is seen as an economic loss because another family will reap the benefits of her adulthood.
That is just deeply unfair.
It is. She is instead kept home to perform unpaid domestic labor or work in the fields until she is married.
But when you explain the brutal economic logic of poverty, you see how the trap is set. And this education fault line becomes an invisible shackle.
It absolutely is an invisible shackle. If you do not have a secondary education, you are structurally barred from high-paying formal jobs.
You can't just walk into a bank and get a job.
No. You cannot become a bank manager, an engineer, or a senior civil servant if you dropped out at age 11. You are trapped in informal, vulnerable labor.
Which is perfectly mirrored when we look at the political and labor realities in the data. Let's look at the people actually making the laws.
The parliament.
Right. In the national parliament, women hold only 16.76% of the seats.
Now, contextually, that is a painful, slow climb from the 8% they held back in the 1990s.
Sure, it doubled. That's progress. But it still means over 80% of the lawmakers, the people writing the budgets, deciding where the new schools are built, drafting maternal health care policy, are men.
And when you look at the broader workforce, female labor force participation is 59.58% against a male participation rate of 75.53%.
Wait, let me push back on that for a second. A roughly 60% participation rate for women doesn't sound entirely broken. That means the majority of women are working, right?
They are working, yes, but the participation rate is highly deceptive.
How so?
It doesn't tell you what they are doing or how they are compensated. Are they working as salaried executives with health benefits?
Probably not.
Or are they working 14-hour days selling produce in an open-air market with zero legal protection or fixed income?
Oh, I see. And the income data answers that question violently.
It really does.
This is probably the most visceral number in this entire section.
Yeah.
The income gap. We talked earlier about the average G&I per capita being around $6,700. But let's split that by gender.
Let's do it.
Men in Côte d'Ivoire earn an estimated average gross national income of $8,252.
Then the women.
Women earn an average of $5,161. That is an income gap of 1.6 times. Men are making astronomically more money on average.
Because of the filter we just talked about.
The education leak.
Exactly. The women were filtered out of education at age 11. That filtered them out of the formal job market at age 20.
Wow.
Which filtered them out of the high income brackets at age 30. Which ultimately filters them out of political power, meaning they don't have the leverage to fix the schools that failed them in the first place.
It is a completely closed, compounding cycle of systemic exclusion.
It really is.
But beyond the economics, beyond the politics, we have to talk about the physical toll. The most sobering statistics in the entire report aren't about money at all.
No, they are about reproductive health.
The maternal mortality ratio. This is where the failure of the health infrastructure becomes literally lethal.
It's the darkest part of the data.
The maternal mortality ratio in Côte d'Ivoire is a frightening 479.9 deaths per 100,000 live births. Think about the gravity of that number. Almost 480 women are dying for every 100,000 children born.
And we really have to ask why. Why is that number so unacceptably high in a country with a booming economy?
Because the resources are hoarded.
Exactly. It comes back to the hoarding of resources.
Right.
If you live in Abidjan and you have money, you give birth in a modern clinic with a trained obstetrician.
Right.
But if you are in a rural village, the nearest clinic might be 30 kilometers away over unpaved roads.
And if you go into complicated labor during the rainy season,
you literally cannot physically get to the hospital.
Oh my God.
Or even if you do get there, the rural clinic lacks a skilled birth attendant, or it doesn't have electricity to run surgical equipment for a C-section, or it lacks a basic blood bank for transfusions.
So women are bleeding out from preventable complications because the national wealth hasn't been spent on rural health logistics?
That is exactly what is happening.
Now, to be fair to the data, there is one area of reproductive health that has seen some improvement.
The adolescent birth rate.
Yes, meaning births to very young women ages 15 to 19. In 1990, it was a staggering 159.9 births per 1,000 young women. Today, in 2023, it has dropped to 92.05.
Which is a positive trend, for sure. It indicates some success in family planning awareness and keeping some girls in school slightly longer.
Right.
But when the overarching system still results in a maternal mortality rate of almost 480, it is clear the medical system is fundamentally failing to protect the women who do become pregnant.
The poorest women are literally paying with their lives during childbirth, while the national HDI graph points up.
It's a tragic reality.
Okay, let's take a breath here and synthesize what we've unpacked so far.
Good idea.
We have an economy that is booming, generating wealth, and raising its national averages.
The shiny downtown picture.
Exactly. But underneath that, almost 40% of that development is lost to systemic inequality. Resources are hoarded in urban centers. Women are structurally held back in education, heavily excluded from parliament, penalized in their paychecks by 1.6 times, and face terrifying medical risks just trying to start a family.
It's a very heavy toll.
It is. So if income and education are being hoarded by a select few at the top to this extreme degree, what does daily life actually look like for the masses at the bottom?
That's the real question.
Because clearly the $6,700 average income is a mirage for them. We have to look past the dollar amounts entirely.
We have to measure poverty in a completely different way.
Right, which brings us to one of the most vital tools in modern developmental economics.
The multidimensional poverty index, or the MPI.
Because as we've established, looking at an average income can be incredibly deceptive.
Very deceptive.
Right. I want to talk directly to you, the listener, for a second. If you read a headline that says, a developing nation's average citizen makes nearly $6,700 a year, you would probably assume that extreme, grinding poverty is relatively rare there.
Sure, that sounds like enough money to get by.
Right. That's enough money to feed a family and have a roof over your head.
If that money were actually evenly distributed, yes.
But the 2021 MPI data completely shatters that assumption. It tells a much darker, much more complex story about what poverty actually is.
The problem with traditional poverty metrics is that they only ask one question. How much cash do you have in your pocket?
And why is that a bad metric?
The MPI argues that cash is totally irrelevant if the environment around you is broken. It measures deprivations across 3 dimensions: health, education, and living standards.
So it looks at the actual physical realities.
Exactly. It asks, do you have a floor in your house? Do you have clean water? Are your children actually attending school?
And when you apply that lens to Côte d'Ivoire, the numbers are jaw-dropping. A massive 42.8% of the population lives in multidimensional poverty.
Almost half the country.
Almost half. And the intensity of that poverty, which measures the average proportion of deprivations that a poor person experiences simultaneously, hits 49.1%.
What does that mean in practical terms?
It means that if you are poor in Côte d'Ivoire, you aren't just lacking one thing. You're lacking almost half of the basic necessities of modern life all at once. The overall MPI value sits at 0.21.
Let's unpack the anatomy of this poverty. What actually makes these 42.8% of citizens poor?
Right. Let's break down the drivers.
When we break down the specific drivers, we see the echoes of everything we've talked about so far today. And one factor casts a massive dark shadow over everything else.
Let me guess. Education. Again.
Always education.
Let's look at the breakdown. The MPI calculates how much each deprivation contributes to the overall poverty index. A lack of years of schooling contributes 22.9%.
Okay.
And a lack of school attendance, meaning children who are supposed to be in school right now but aren't, adds another 19.2%.
So if you combine those two.
Education deficits drive an overwhelming 42.1% of all multidimensional poverty in the country.
42.1%. It's the single largest mechanism keeping people trapped.
And when you look beyond the schools, you see the collapse of basic living standards. Nutrition deficits drive 17% of the poverty index.
Meaning almost a fifth of the poverty is simply people not having enough calories or not having the right nutrients to develop properly.
Which leads to childhood stunting rate.
Exactly.
Then you have a lack of clean cooking fuel, which contributes 9.9%.
This is a huge, often overlooked issue in these reports.
Really? Why is cooking fuel so important?
If you don't have electricity or clean gas, you are burning wood or charcoal inside your home to cook. The indoor air pollution from that causes severe chronic respiratory diseases.
Oh, wow. I never even thought of that.
And it disproportionately affects the women who are doing the majority of the cooking.
Of course it does. And finally, a lack of proper sanitation adds another 9.4%.
So no safe toilets, no sewage management, which leads directly back to health crises like cholera and dysentery.
Looking at this breakdown, I mean, it completely destroys a very popular Western myth about how to solve global poverty.
The cash handout myth?
Yes, you cannot solve this just by tweaking the economy to generate more cash, or even by handing out microloans to everyone.
Not at all.
It's like trying to cure a systemic, deep-rooted infection with a Band-Aid. Think about it. If you give a family an extra $50 a month, but there's no physical school for their children to attend.
That cash doesn't magically build a school?
Exactly.
Yeah?
If there's no clean water to drink in their village, cash in their pocket doesn't purify the local river. A higher national GNI doesn't automatically build a sewage system for them.
No, public goods require public investment. And this brings us full circle.
How so?
This connects directly back to the 46% inequality loss in education we discussed earlier. The elite are hoarding the public resources to build quantum leap schools in the capital.
While 42.8% of the country is forced into multidimensional poverty precisely because those resources were diverted away from the rural communities.
Exactly. You cannot lower the 42.8% poverty rate without dismantling the 46% education inequality penalty. The data is a completely closed loop.
So we have spent a lot of time looking at the human cost today. We've seen how the average rural citizen, and particularly the women, are footing the bill for this unequal economic boom. But there's another entity footing the bill for this rapid development, an entity that doesn't get a paycheck, doesn't get a vote, and is deeply, deeply strained by all this growth. Let's talk about the Earth's tab.
Ah, yes. This is one of the most fascinating and frankly counterintuitive layers of the entire report.
It really is. To measure this, we use a relatively new metric introduced by the UN, the Planetary Pressures Adjusted Human Development Index, or PHDI.
Right, the PHDI takes the standard Human Development Index and mathematically penalizes a country based on the environmental burden they are creating to achieve that development.
So usually when you apply the PHDI to a highly developed, wealthy Western nation, they're score tanks.
Oh, absolutely. They have a high HDI, but they pollute so heavily, emit so much carbon, and consume so much plastic that their adjusted score drops significantly.
But here is the massive twist in the data for Côte d'Ivoire. It's a bit of a mind-bender, honestly.
It is.
In 2023, their baseline HDI, as we know, is 0.52, but their planetary pressures adjusted score, their PHDI, is 0.537.
The score actually goes up.
Right. When I first read this, my brain broke a little bit. I assumed planetary pressure meant a penalty, like, congratulations on your factories, here is your pollution demerit.
That's the logical assumption.
I can imagine environmentalists looking at this and being very confused to see a win here. Their score actually shows a positive difference of 7.73%. How is their environmental metric acting as a buffer that improves their standing?
It creates a fascinating scenario that we can call the carbon versus material paradox.
The carbon versus material paradox. Okay, break that down for me.
To understand why the score goes up, we have to look at the two underlying environmental metrics that drive the PHDI: carbon emissions and material footprint.
Let's start with carbon.
Per capita, CO2 emissions in Côte d'Ivoire are incredibly low. We're talking about just 0.457 tons of carbon per person in 2023.
0.457 tons. To put that in perspective for you listening, developed Western nations are often emitting well over 10, 15, sometimes nearly 20 tons per person.
Exactly. So on the carbon front, the Ivorian population is treading exceptionally lightly on the global atmosphere.
Because they aren't running massive, highly industrialized, coal-burning megagrids.
Right. They aren't driving millions of gas-guzzling SUVs. Therefore, the formula rewards them. Because their carbon impact is practically zero compared to the West, their adjusted HDI shifts upward relative to heavier polluters.
But there is the second metric. And this is where the paradox reveals its teeth.
The material footprint.
Yes. The report defines material footprint as the total amount of raw materials extracted from the earth to meet the country's consumption demands. In 1990, the material footprint in Côte d'Ivoire was 4.69 tons per capita.
And today?
By 2023, that number has skyrocketed to an alarming 13.51 tons per person.
It has almost tripled.
Right. And this raises a crucial investigative question. Why do we see a massive spike in material footprint without a corresponding spike in carbon emissions? What exactly are they doing?
Well, let's unpack that. What does a tripling of material footprint actually look like on the ground if it's not factories burning coal?
Right, what is it?
What it looks like is the classic signature of a developing nation infrastructure boom. They aren't producing mountains of consumer plastic junk or running massive server farms. What they are doing is physically extracting the earth.
Like mining.
Mining minerals, yes. They are cutting down massive swaths of timber. They are pouring millions of tons of concrete at breakneck speed.
To build those skyscrapers we talked about at the very beginning of the episode.
Exactly. They are extracting physical materials to build roads, to construct rapidly expanding cities, and crucially, to clear land to export raw agricultural goods like cocoa to the rest of the world.
The sheer weight of the physical stuff being pulled out of the ground and moved around is immense.
So it's the ecological shadow of rapid development. They are quite literally physically building the nation from the dirt up.
Precisely. They're building the infrastructure required to try and lift that GNI and push their HDI into the medium development tier. But an expanding material footprint of 13.51 tons per person is incredibly heavy on the local geography.
What are the on-the-ground consequences of that kind of weight?
It means intense pressure on local ecosystems. It means severe deforestation. I mean, Côte d'Ivoire has lost a massive percentage of its primary forests over the last few decades, largely to expand cocoa farming.
Right.
It means soil degradation, where the land is farmed so aggressively it just loses all its nutrients. And it means water table depletion, where rivers and underground aquifers are drained for construction and agriculture.
Like the environment is quietly taking out a massive loan to pay for this human development boom.
That's exactly what it is. And eventually, whether it's in 5 years or 50 years, that bill is going to come due. You cannot extract 13 tons of material per person per year forever without the ecosystem eventually collapsing under the strain.
And here's the truly tragic irony in all of this. When that ecosystem does begin to collapse, when the rains become unpredictable due to deforestation, or the soil stops yielding cocoa, who is going to be harmed the most?
Girl poor.
Exactly. A collapsing ecosystem disproportionately harms the 42.8% of the population living in multidimensional poverty.
Because they rely directly on the land for their daily survival.
Yes. The elite in Abidjan can import their food if they have to. The rural farmers cannot. So the environmental debt being racked up to build the economy will eventually be paid by the poorest citizens.
Man. Which brings a deeply sobering clarity to our mission today. We promise to look under the hood of a booming economy, to see past the glossy 0.52 HDI and the $6,700 average income.
And what we found were massive, deep-rooted structural fault lines.
Right. If Côte d'Ivoire wants to achieve true, inclusive, sustainable growth, they have to face these realities.
Absolutely.
Let's synthesize the three major challenges the data is just screaming at us.
Challenge number one is the root of almost everything we've talked about. They must radically redistribute educational resources.
Yes, that gaping 46% inequality loss in education is the anchor holding the entire nation back. You cannot build a resilient modern economy when the average adult is walking around with less than 5 years of schooling, while a tiny elite gets world-class degrees.
They have to invest in rural infrastructure, pay rural teachers, and keep children in classrooms instead of cocoa fields.
Challenge number two. They absolutely must protect women's rights and empower their female citizens. Escaping the absolute bottom tier of the globe ranking 169th in gender inequality is not just a moral imperative, it is an economic emergency.
They have to fix the leaky pipeline that pulls 11-year-old girls out of school and forces them into early marriages.
Right, and they have to fix the health logistics that result in 480 mothers dying for every 100,000 births. You simply cannot build a thriving nation when half your population is trapped behind a 1.6 times income gap and locked out of parliament.
And challenge number three, they must eradicate multidimensional poverty. They have to alleviate the daily survival pressure on the 42.8% of citizens who have been completely left out of the economic boom.
That means realizing that cash isn't a cure-all. They need massive public investment in clean water, safe cooking fuels, rural sanitation, and clinics that actually serve the poor, rather than just building infrastructure that serves the export markets.
So, given all this data, where does that leave them today?
Well, Côte d'Ivoire is truly at a historical crossroads. The data from 1990 to 2023 shows they have successfully navigated the era of growth at all costs. They survived a lost decade, they rebuilt, and they got the macroeconomic numbers up.
Which is an achievement.
It is an achievement. But now they desperately need to transition to an era of quality structural growth.
Because if they do not solve the 39.6% inequality cost that is dragging down their HDI, their economic boom will remain a hollow victory.
It'll just be a shiny, fragile veneer built over a deeply fractured foundation.
It's a stark reality check.
It really is. And honestly, spending this much time in the data leaves me thinking about something much bigger than just one country.
Yeah.
The end goal of human development is not just making the numbers on a spreadsheet go up. It's not about GDP or PPP or any other acronym.
No, it's not.
It is fundamentally about equal opportunities. The goal is a society where a 12-year-old girl born in a rural farming village has the exact same mathematical expectation of a healthy, educated, and prosperous life as a boy born in the wealthiest, most elite neighborhood of the capital.
That is the ultimate goal.
And for you listening right now, I want to leave you with a thought to mull over as you go about your day. Take a hard look at the averages in your own life. Look at the metrics of success you use in your own company, or your own community, or your own country. Who is being hidden in the blind spots of that success?
That's a great question to ask.
If the average goes up, if your company reports absolute record profits, or your national GDP rises, but the median stays completely flat, and the people at the very bottom are struggling more than ever to pay for groceries, whose success are we really celebrating?
Right.
The end goal of human development isn't the rising of the numbers, it's the equalizing of the chance.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.